Board games. Board games. We might be talking about board games, but we're not gonna shout. We are starting off this streaming with a little bit of singing, and today we're talking about alliances. And we'll talk about what this is. And of course, I forgot to mention, first of all, we are chatting with the wonderful Alan Paull. We'll talk about this mechanism today and whether it should feature in the games you want to make, or whether it should feature in the games you want to play, or do whatever with on maybe today or another day. Board games is what we're talking about. Board games and alliances. I'm not going to shout. Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Hello, everybody.
Wherever it is, wherever you are. Thank you for joining me, Alan. And today, as always, recently we have been going through this series together of pondering mechanisms.
Yes, in a very allied kind of way, I think.
Yes, I feel like we are definitely allied. Yes. Oh my gosh, I just realized I put 719. This is not episode 719 at all. This is episode 731. I blame this morning. It's been a rough day. I've had a bit of a headache, okay? I didn't notice that.
That's fair enough, yeah. We've been a bit tired actually, and because we've been to Centre Parks last week.
How was it? Shall we? I mean,
we should do the.
Let's do the intro. So alliances. It's kind of like being on a team, but it's more temporary. It's kind of like giving you a chance to negotiate, but it's more formalized. I mean, in Cosmic Encounter, which I think is almost the archetypal alliances game, like whatever it is, by having it formalized within the game rules, it means that you can maybe discuss, hey, are we going to be on the alliance next time? And these shifting, it's even though it says alliances, what it basically means is shifting alliances. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's fair to say. It does mean shifting alliances. If it was permanent alliances that you couldn't break, that would be a team game.
Yes, exactly.
But this is shifting alliances,
they use shorter words, which makes perfect sense. I mean, why use two words when one will do?
One will do.
Although I have to say that one extra word, shifting alliances, would actually describe the thing perfectly now I think about it. So I would humbly suggest that to Geoff Engelstein.
You could, why not? Yes. Yes, we are looking at this book. It's from this book, Building Blocks of Tabletop Game Design, an encyclopedia of mechanisms, not mechanics, but mechanisms. Yes, Jeffrey Engelstein and Isaac Shalev, which is a very good investment if you want to know everything there is to know about board game design mechanics. It's mechanisms. It's really, really comprehensive. And we're going to go. Although interestingly, you say we're going through it, but we're going through it kind of alphabetically. Whereas this one, if you look at the book, it's right in the middle. You see, alliances is
because in the book it starts off with the overarching structures, and then it goes into the things you can do in a game, and then it might have like a chapter on all the types of auctions. So things are more commonly linked together, and really alliances and team building games should be next to each other, which they are in the book. But we are, as you say, going by the Boardgamegeek list, which is I think it's worth always, when we talk about this, as I understand the history of it, there were a bunch of mechanisms on Boardgamegeek, and so there was a much shorter list, but then at a certain point Scott Halden said, you know what, this is kind of out of date, this is kind of rubbish, and we should have a better list. Hey, Isaac, and if you wrote a book, would you be willing to put bits of your book onto the website? So then if you go to alliances, they will have written there's a big excerpt. You don't get all the discussion that you do from the book, so there's still value in buying the book. But this really helps, I think, bring it to a general audience, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm interested in if you look at the book that Alliances is in the section called economics, which is defined as games where you are gaining and using assets to achieve victory. So in fact, what in their estimation, I think they're right. An ally is an obvious asset. So Alliances does kind of, although it's not really economics, it does kind of fit with that kind of thing. Gaining, what you're doing is gaining more, whatever it is you have from the alliance.
It's really interesting when you talk about what, like in a card game, what resources do you have? And a beginner to Magic the Gathering will think, okay, I guess my resources are the lands, which give me mana. And then as the time goes on, you realize, well, the big resource and your life, I guess. But then it's not only the mana and your life, which is like, yeah, a very big thing. It's how you win the game. But it's also about the cards in hand. It's about the number of actions that you have. Like, you know, gaining a new turn is like one of the most powerful effects you can have in the game, to the point where a card that says gain another turn and you lose the game at the end of that turn is incredibly powerful still, because played at the correct moment, that gives you another attack, it gives you another untap, and your opponent's creatures won't be able to untap. And so all these incremental advantages. What is a resource? If you are actually looking at it in game terms, and you have to think very holistically and open up the umbrella of that term.
Yeah, good. I think we've done that. That bit.
Let's take a step back and do recent highlights, living life and seed sites, recent highlights, playing games and other delights. Recent highlights. What have you gotten up to? How was Centre Parks?
Well, Centre Parks was really good. We went with my youngest daughter and her husband and their two children, so our grandchildren, Oscar and Beth. And really, as grandparents, our role was to take the kids every so often so that Jen and Martin could do stuff too. And that was great because they're Oscar's 8 and Beth's 5. So we had a lot of fun. We did swimming. We did crazy golf. Yeah, that was fun. It's a perennial thing we do at Centre Parks, crazy golf. But we also played some games, which is really quite good.
So Centre Parks is like a resort, a place that you stay, and then you've got all these places dotted around. You said swimming pool and crazy golf is on site.
There's loads of activities. So we had Encounter with Owls, which basically means there's a falconry centre and you can go and have owls sitting on your arm and things like that. And there's lots of adventure-y type things like segways, and you can, if you're a kiddie, you can learn football and table tennis. So there's lots of sports you can do.
If you're adult, can you play those things against other adults?
I don't know. I've never really done that kind of football. You can always hire equipment like table tennis bats and badminton and things, and have the old game. We didn't actually do much sport, I would have to say.
And you said that there was some board gaming.
But we did some board games because we took some games with us. It's what we do.
Did you take one of the LDEC? Did you play one of the LDEC games?
No, I'm afraid not. No, sorry. Apologies. Should have done really, but we didn't. We took Potion Explosion to play with Oscar. And
that's a lovely game of only played it digitally, I must admit, taking out the things to clack down the balls. I can imagine how this would be a lot more joyful in real life, having the visceral clack, clack, clack. I have to admit, as a match-free game, I was slightly disappointed when I read the rules and finally discovered that it's only within each column that things matter. I was expecting there to be something across the rows as well.
It's basically marbles in columns on a sloping plastic container, and you take a marble out, and if the marbles that then crash together or explode, if they're the same color, you take those and you add them to your store. And then if the next lot also are the same color, you take those as well. So it cascades.
So it's kind of like a match 2 game, you could say.
Yeah.
Because when things crash together. If there's two matching, then boom. And that initial thing that you take out, it could be literally just the one marble. And then you've got effects to switch things around and move things or change
you make
colors.
Potions. You use the various different design. However many colored marbles there are? 5?
Doesn't matter.
Anyway, doesn't
exactly.
matter. But you use those you slot those into little cardboard potion things. When you've made your potion, you then can use the ability of that potion, which is obviously things like take extra marbles from various places, all that kind of stuff. You take marbles from the bottom of the rows, all this. So basically the idea is that as the game progresses, you've got more ability to gain loads more marbles and complete more potions, and the game ends when you've got a number, when all the bonus tiles which you get for having sets of the same potion or sets of different potions, when all the bonus tiles are gone, the game ends. But it's really good. Oscar's now learned how to play it, and so he's well up. He likes that game. And we also played Deep Sea Adventure, which I think lots of people will know. Push Your Luck submarine treasure gathering game. And that was good. We also taught Martin.
That first one was
Potion Explosion. There we go. Potion Explosion.
And there we've got a wee picture. And I know that there's a lot of other games, but in the interests of brevity, shall we? Unless there's like one more game.
No, that's right. Let's carry on. Yeah.
But yeah, lovely game, and I'd love to play it in real life sometime. But let's carry on. And shall we talk about why alliances are a brilliant thing? I mean, I guess in real life, you don't want to say that you are going to be friends forever necessarily. You don't want to say we're going to always be doing the same thing. But at least for this moment, we are doing the same thing. We're working together. And I think there's a nice reflection of that in the game, right? Kind of saying that, hey, we are not going to always be on the same team. Things shift, things change, but there's a formality to it. It's like a peace treaty.
Yes, our objectives at the moment coincide, so let's work together towards those. And then when they're done, we'll review things and see if we still want to stay allied. Yes.
And hello to me. It's lovely to see you, and I hope that you're generally well.
Alliances in games are very positive things, aren't they? Because it means basically players, 2 or more players, are cooperating together. So we're not always just going to be competitive in games. We're working together, theoretically. I mean, it's all the trouble is with board games, isn't it? It's always that. Yes, okay, we're theoretically working together, but we might actually, in strategic terms, be enemies. But for the moment, we're working together because it suits both of us to work together. And we'll come to,
I guess there needs to be a certain degree of complexity to the game to have an alliance rather than just a straight up team. Because having just a straight up team, you are in this team, it is all other things being equal, simpler rules than saying, oh, you're in this team, but in a few turns you might not be.
Yes, I think the important thing about alliances as defined, there's only one sentence. Players have formal relationships that may change over the course of the game. And the stress in terms of alliances is formal relationships. So the classic game which people might think of as an alliance-based game is diplomacy. But actually, diplomacy doesn't have formal alliances. You could, if you wanted to, players could make a kind of formal alliance by announcing it to everybody, but that is not enforced. It's not enforced by the rules at all. Those alliances in diplomacy,
but again, that is just teamwork,
informal affairs. It's more
But according to this rule, and hello, Mike, thank you for joining in. Temporary alliances also provide possibilities to combat the leader or to catch up your position if you're falling behind. But again, that feels like that is not teamwork, negotiation. Because if you're playing Risk, even though there are no formal alliances, you would be playing really badly if you didn't kind of talk to the other players and say, we need to gang up on this person who's got this massive overwhelming force. And
but those are just negotiations. Those are informal, and they generally involve some give and take. either promises of what we might do in the future. I'll do this now. I'll attack here if you attack there. Those kinds of things, none of which are enforceable by the game mechanics, particularly in Risk or in diplomacy. Famously, diplomacy isn't. None of the alliances in diplomacy are enforceable. You can agree to cooperate and then forget.
And that's an
and there's
interesting
no
thing,
repercussions
because actually having alliances maybe robs the game of the potential for backstabbing.
That goes to the heart of it. It's how you implement the formal relationship that determines that kind of thing. And there are lots of varieties. We'll go through those, I guess, to show how you can differently put alliances in your game to make it have different effects. I mean, the one that I have been working on, you can see it in the background, is a game called Kingmaker. And that
is a game with formal alliances.
Well, as luck would have it, is a game with formal alliances. Now, interestingly, it's not listed on the Geek as having formal alliances, which I kind of find a bit strange, because even the original, or at least the Avalon Hill version, I think there was a hint of formality in it, in that there were constraints of when you can break an alliance. There weren't constraints of when you can have one. But there's certainly in all the Kingmaker rules, there's been you can do this, you can only do this if you have an alliance kind of affair. So I'm a bit surprised that it hasn't got Kingmaker as an alliances.
I mean, look, we can't.
But that's fine.
Boardgamegeek is brilliant, and I decided that we should actually thank Boardgamegeek in the thing, so I added that bit in, because it's a fantastic repository, but it's not curate. It's like any wiki, which is essentially what it is. It is prone to errors, and not everything will be complete. Not everything will necessarily even be correct.
Yeah, that's not a problem. Right, so alliances are brilliant things.
So let's get to how are they defined. So you mentioned that one rule, that one sentence, which is repeated on Boardgamegeek, but Boardgamegeek then also goes into talking about negotiation.
Yes.
And negotiation, it's governed by specific game rules.
Yeah.
For example, and then it gives a couple of examples, but if the allies do not shift, if it's for the entire game, then it is a team-based game, which is exactly what we said. Do we need to, shall we get into some examples?
Yeah, let's get into some examples, because I think that those are quite interesting, because there's many and many varied ways you can do this. I mean, should we take some extremes first? I mean,
I'll let you take the charge on this discussion.
Okay. I think the original Kingmaker type of alliance is at one extreme. Is the loosest, one of the loosest extremes anyway, in that the rules basically said you can have an alliance whenever you like. You can just declare your alliance, and that means that you can work together. So all of your fortified locations are shared. You can fight together, and you can cooperate on anything you like. And it also says you can break an alliance at any time. So
what distinguishes that from negotiation? Because even though it's called an alliance in the rules, isn't that really just negotiation at that point?
Well, there are the formality is that you are allowed to fight together. So it is a formal relationship, in the sense that if you haven't got an alliance, you don't fight together. And you can't just informally decide in a battle, oh well, for this battle I'll ally with you, and then for the next battle I'll ally with somebody else. Well, I mean, you theoretically might be able to, but it's got a little bit more formality to it. And in the Avalon Hill version of the game, you can only when you break an alliance, you have to give your opponent a whole turn to be able to react. So there's, like I said, it's on the very, very loosest side. So there is a formal relationship, but it's very loose, and you can in one version of the game, you have to give your opponent, your allies, around to come to terms with the fact that the alliance has been broken.
If Geoff or I are watching this, I would be interested to hear what you think of those examples. But for me, the first example of Kingmaker, it feels like it's more on the side of negotiation rather than alliances, with the game rules offering resources that you can pull together or trade, but it's not I don't know. It feels like the second one, where you've got this alliance, and once you break, you can only break it at certain times. Because if you say you can break this literally any time you want, that doesn't feel like an alliance anymore.
There is an optional rule in the original in the Avalon Hill Kingmaker, which says optionally you can break an alliance at any time. Now, in a lot of groups, people don't like that, because I think it's partly because of what you said, that makes it more like just a negotiation and not an actual alliance. So if you're constrained by only being able to break an alliance at a certain time, I think that brings it more into the realm of a formal relationship. In fact, I've got that a bit in the version that I've redeveloped. Alliances, you can only break an alliance at the end of your turn, so automatically gives your opponent the chance to recover.
And can you start an alliance at any time, presumably? Because you would sometimes have to start it out with your turn.
You can. Now the in my version of the redeveloped Kingmaker, when you have an alliance with somebody, you are pooling the royal pieces you've got. Now there's Yorkists and there's Lancastrians. In this new version, if I've got a royalist and if I've got a Yorkist and you've got a Lancastrian, we can't ally unless one of us gets rid of that particular house. So an alliance can only be a Yorkist alliance or a Lancastrian alliance in terms of the royal pieces, and that makes it a little bit more formal in terms of relationship. And we also pool our prestige points, so we can actually have an alliance victory in the new version of Kingmaker, whereas in the original game only one player can win. So the dynamic is very different. In the original game, alliances are very, 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 very fragile, because you can't ally and then win together, because only one player can win in the original game with the last royal piece, which by definition, the one royal piece can only be owned by one player. Now in the new version, the alliance as a whole can have one royal piece, and you can win through prestige as the allies, or you can win actually through just having the last royal piece as an ally.
As we're talking, I'm kind of feeling like one essential thing for an alliance is for there to be a stipulation on when exactly it can be broken. Because if it can be broken any time, it's his negotiation.
Well,
but in Cosmic Encounter, you know that until the end of this battle, even if it's as short as that, until the end of this battle, we will be working together. You have that certainty.
I think if we look at that definition, it just means a formal relationship. For example,
a formality. It has to be a formality to it. But I feel that when Mike says diplomacy surely must be one of the earliest examples of fluid, non-enforced alliances, is when we get back to, that's not according to the definition that we are working by, as defined by Isaac Shalev and Jesse Engelstein. These are, it's not an alliance game.
It's a negotiation game. Yes. Well, it is one of the purest forms of negotiation games, because all you're negotiating in diplomacy is, can I get temporary use of some of your force to help me? That's what you're negotiating about, and the whole game is about that, really.
It feels like there is a blurry line.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you need to have a defined end point for an alliance, but I do think there has to be a formal game mechanism or detailed game mechanism about the alliance. So, for example, I would say that my
does have, if not a defined endpoint, some sort of repercussion for breaking it.
Yeah,
because one of those two. Because if you don't have either of them, and you are free to go back on your word, then there isn't any formality to it.
Yeah, so I mean, just using Kingmaker again, the tournament version of Kingmaker people can make willy-nilly alliances, but they're completely unenforceable. There's no control over start or end point, and basically it's a bit like it's not even like Cosmic Encounter. Actually, I was going to say a bit like that, but all you're doing with an alliance in the Tournament Kingmaker old version is agreeing to fight this battle together. That's it. And interestingly, you could make that agreement and then not follow through with it. So there's no formality in that. So I would say that if there's no control over the starting point or the end point, and there's no actual requirement to do anything together during the alliance, it's not an alliance, it's a negotiation, I think. Can we go to the other end? If we go to the other end of the idea of alliances, I think Struggle of Empires probably goes to the much more defined end of what an alliance can be like in a game. So this is an older game, 2005, something like that, by Martin Wallace.
2004.
2004. And in this game, it's the theme is basically European powers in the 18th century trying to dominate Europe, and it's got what you'd expect. It's got military forces, fleets, and armies and stuff. But the critical thing is alliances. So basically, there are you're a major power in the period, and in each war that happens, you have to form the players into two alliances. And once you're allied with the player, you can't fight each other. Now, the way the alliances are formed, though, is that you bid for the ability to choose who's going to ally with whom. So you actually make a proposal about who is going to ally with whom, and that can only be changed if somebody outbids you. So the classic thing in Struggle of Empires is, well, this is my major opponent. I want to be allied with them so that they can't attack me, which is just kind of hilarious as an idea, really. It's just it's a brilliant idea. The best thing you can do towards the end of Struggle of Empires is ally with your main
over someone else.
Force your main opponent to ally with you, it's interesting because the period, it kind of fits vaguely with the period because there were kind of diplomatic revolutions, because in the War of Austrian Succession, you have everybody ganging up on Austria. So you have Austria funded by Britain, and it's Prussia, France, and the Turks and the Russians. Everybody's against Austria to try to dismember the Austrian Empire, and that fails. But then there's a diplomatic revolution between the end of that war and the start of the 7 Years' War, and then you get Prussia. It's basically Prussia and Britain, and everybody else changes sides. So it kind of does feel that flavour of changing alliances, and it's not necessarily you haven't necessarily got a complete alignment of objectives between allies, if I can put it like that, in that period. So it does fit, because sometimes you get advisors to kings who are secretly working against the interests of their own country, and things like that can happen, and that's quite a clever way of implementing this kind of idea. Allying with your main enemy is just such a beautiful idea that it does make that game really, really nice. And you can only change that alliance at the end of the war, if I recall correctly. Once that particular war is over, you can then change alliances. But again, you're bidding to see who you're allying with.
Yeah, there's something interesting about, the restrictions that come with a formal alliance, and how there can be asymmetry within that negotiation of what people might actually want. I guess a reasonable thing to, even though I've not played it, something that is worth talking about is Dune. Have you played this one?
I think I have played Dune, but it was a long time ago. I think I only played it once. But it does have this, again, this concept of a formal alliance, where I think you choose
Yes, so it's
allied to.
There's a negotiation in order to form the alliances, but then the alliances have a formal rules meaning, which is that you can win together. Like in Cosmic Encounter, you can actually, you will win the game together potentially. And also, you can not attack. That's just a given. But then at a certain point in the game, a few more, like there's another nexus, and then
that's right.
you renegotiate all your alliances, and you might stick with it or you might not.
I like that word. I think having it's the nexus of choice, isn't it? I think that's a good word to describe it. For these very formal type of games where it's not just in this game I particularly want to ally with that person. It's actually formally designed into the game mechanisms that you have to have alliances, and there usually is a nexus or several during the game where those alliances can change, because you kind of, as we said earlier, it has to be shifting alliances. If a major mechanism of the game is alliances, they have to be shifting alliances, otherwise it's a team game. It reminds me of a very old game that I used to play way back when I was a teenager called Campaign. You may not know this. Is a very, very simple Napoleonic, thinly themed game where you are France, Prussia, Austria, and somebody else, Spain, I think it is, and you are fighting a Napoleonic themed war. And in that game, as long as you've got more than 2 players, you have alliance cards, and you can actually swap alliance cards. So you're formally deciding that we're allied, in which case you don't attack each other and you are working together towards some form of common objective. That's the formal. I like that formality where, in order to ally, I'm swapping a card with my ally. That's a nice, clear way of implementing it.
And you've also got the potential to do that sort of thing for favors in games. I mean, not just something like Confucius, but I've seen it in other games where you are saying, okay, I'm going to do this good thing for you, and if you agree, I will take this card, which means that now you cannot attack me. And that's not quite an alliance, but it feels related.
That is an interesting one, yes, because I never thought of that gift giving mechanic from Confucius being really an alliance. It's more of a blocker. But then again, I see where you're coming from, though. In that game, what you're doing is you give an opponent a gift, and while they have that gift, they can't act against you, and in fact, in some cases, they have to actually aid you. So it is a kind of forced alliance, I think, until such time as they either give you a better gift or they do something to help you, which then breaks that commitment.
Yes, so it's about clearing that obligation, and that is the theme of the game, which is really interesting.
Yes. I think it probably is an alliance, actually. It feels, the more I talk about it, the more I think, actually, force. I mean, it's like Struggle of Empires. It's a force alliance.
Because in the same way, you've got alliances. If we kind of look at them, okay, there's some like Dune, where people go into them willingly. There's some like Struggle of Empires, or if we accept that they are alliances like Confucius, where they can be forced upon your opponent. And I guess there's also some like, if I can get it up on the screen, Cosmic Encounter, where it's randomly enforced by the game, just saying, hey, you're going to be playing with this other person on this turn.
I can't remember how the Cosmic Encounter alliances work, actually. Can you remind us?
From my memory, it's basically, hey, let me flip over a card. This is who I'm working with. This is the color. Okay, boom. You and I are going to go against this other player. I cannot attack you. I'm going to attack this third player. And we can trade things. If you give me more help, we might negotiate that I allow you to put more things or fewer things onto this planet. But it's in both people's interest to make sure that the attack is successful against the third party.
Yes, I think that's a key dynamic to have in that type of affair, where it's very conflict related.
And there's also,
and I do recall it. I do recall in Cosmic Encounter, you definitely, if you're allied, you definitely want to win. You do not want to lose. So even if you're allied with the person who is a rival, it's not to the benefit of either player. I think I recall it's not to benefit of either player to lose when you're allied, which is strong.
Yes, absolutely, and
yeah,
that feels like it has to be the way it is. And
I think
like,
we struggle.
It's interesting that even in Cosmic Encounter, even the target, even the person that you're attacking, is dictated by the game, I think.
Right.
And so it kind of get the whole chaos of the game and getting around things. I will actually have a quick look through the rules, which I probably should have done before the show. I do apologize. Yeah, it is a long rule sheet, so I'm not going to lie. Are there other examples that you really want to bring up?
I think we've covered pretty much all. The other game that I have played, which has got alliances, is Ideology. I don't know if you've played that.
I haven't.
It's a primarily, I was going to say it's primarily card game, but it has got a map on it as well. Basically, you are what you're trying to do is push forward an ideology like capitalism or imperialism or communism or fascism and stuff like that. And you use your influence to manipulate the economy, the culture, and use military combat to knock out opponents' influence. So you can work together, and I can't remember unfortunately I can't remember what the actual alliance mechanism is, which is a bit silly.
You know what?
But you can work together on with the same ism, if you like, which is nice.
I just looked up the rules for Cosmic Encounter. I want to correct myself. You have the Destiny phase where you reveal who you are attacking, and then you launch, you choose the planet, but it's all about that one. So your destiny is you have to attack yellow. That's dictated by the game, so it removes the feeling of ill will, so to speak. And then the alliance phase, it's a free-form invite. You invite other people to say, would you like to join me? And then other people will accept or not. And there are formal meanings to that, which means that you get either ships or other things. Yes, you can see that the purple and the all the allies will place their chips onto the target. If the defense wins, then all the defensive ally can get a small card benefit to potentially help in future. And so, yeah, the inviting an ally is completely freeform, like it's been done in Dune, for example. And this ally is going to last until the end of this attack.
Yes. The alliance mechanism in Ideology is, I remember slightly looking at the rules to brighten my brain on it, is very interesting. Actually, it is a slightly different mechanism. So I said that you can have conflict which is either economic or cultural or military. Well, those bits are controlled by what it calls diplomatic status. So basically, if you're at peace with somebody else, you can only have a cultural conflict. If you're neutral, you can have cultural and economic conflicts. And if you're at war, you can have all three. So there is a formal diplomacy phase where you effectively agree on the diplomatic status between you. So So that is really that's really a formal political thing, which is an interesting way of doing it. And so even if you're alliances really just means you can only compete on culture. And the grading of the types of working together is a very interesting way of implementing that, and really goes to, I think, the heart of the complexity of politics, and that's what makes that game quite an interesting one, a different implementation from a lot of the other ones. So it's not just alliances, but it's the level of alliance that you've got with each other player, which determines what
that
you
is interesting.
do,
So there's different depths of alliances.
Yeah.
So rather than it just being a binary thing, that is wow.
And it's done in a I would say a relatively simple card game. So yeah, I must get that out again actually, because it's a nice idea. And I do remember really quite enjoying it. It may have been a game where we played it quite a few times and it possibly became a bit samey, but I think it definitely deserves getting out and playing again.
I think fundamentally we've got alliances where everyone agrees to it, like Dune and Cosmic Encounter, and we've got alliances where it's a unilateral decision, like
Struggle of Empires.
Yes, Struggle of Empires and Confucius, if you decide that is such a thing.
Yeah.
And then could there be a game with a randomly dictated alliance? I mean, where I guess that would just because that would just be shifting teams. That's very different, right?
I think that's different. I think there is, yes. I think the interesting thing about alliances is that the interesting alliances really are where you have got some form of control over. I mean, if you look at Struggle of Empires, it's not just we randomly have to be in two groups. It's not random. It's the players have got a strong influence on how the alliances will work. Hence, and the same with the ideology game. You have got that thing. If I can encapsulate, so you're doing the politics of it, aren't you? The good implementations are when you do the politics. So you're working out, right? I mean,
because there are party games that I've played where we say, okay, on this turn, you are in a team with this person, and now you're in a team with the person to the other side, and sometimes then you get to be on a team with the people across from you, just so, and that doesn't have any politics.
No, I think the alliances has to have the politics. So it's because, I mean, the description does say formal relationships, which may change, and that's basically politics, isn't it?
And I guess that's also the key thing, that it may change, it may not, because in any of these games, in theory, you could be on a team with the same person throughout the entire game, right?
Yes, you could. I mean, I have one of our playtesters in Kingmaker. He really does like to have an alliance, and he likes it to be a strong alliance for the whole game. Now, there is a difficulty with that.
Isn't there an argument that then you could, I guess also again in Kingmaker, then it's interesting because then you break the alliance, it's at the end of your turn, then they have the chance to retaliate.
But of course, a lot of players like the idea that you don't straight away form an alliance, that you have to work out what the power relationships are. So in my version, you can't form an alliance straight away. I didn't want to have the situation where two friends just decide at the start of the game they're just going to ally straight away and stay in an alliance and just dominate the game. I didn't want to have that, because that's destroying key parts of the mechanics of the game, of how the game flow is for other players. So I don't allow alliances to occur, formal alliances, until one of the heads of the two houses has been captured by the players. So until somebody's taken over Henry VI or Richard of York, you can't have an alliance. Now, by the time that happens, you're beginning to feel that the power relationships between the players are developing. So then I would judge that the alliances then are not arbitrary, and they had some kind of political meaning. If it's just a couple of friends who decide right at the start of the game, well, we're just going to ally regardless, then while they can try to do that in formal terms, to me, that feels like a kind of manipulation.
That's a really interesting point for design. And I feel like it's worth noting that if we set aside obligation type things, which, because of the unilateral decision, it's questionable whether they are alliances or not. But we've got stuff like Struggle of Empires and Dune and Cosmic Encounter, where these have a fixed potential endpoint. I mean, Dune or Cosmic Encounter, you could have, or Struggle of Empires, you could have the same alliances, but it all has to be renegotiated. You have to do the renegotiation. Whereas I'm wondering how many things there are where it goes to the point of, well, let's give the players essentially a penalty for breaking the alliance, which even though it's not a formal penalty, but saying you have to break the alliance at the end of your own turn is essentially giving the opportunity to get that penalty.
I mean,
under that rule, alliances are likely to go longer than if they are periodically. So it makes sense to say you cannot have alliances at the first such and such parts of the game.
I mean, when you're talking about penalties, I mean, there are going to be some games where you have a penalty for breaking an alliance. I did look at that in Kingmaker. I thought, well, if you break an alliance, you ought to take a prestige loss because you're not being trustworthy. But the problem with that is that it became too big a penalty, and it meant alliances were actually too stable. So if you're taking a prestige loss, you're actually reducing your chances of winning the game quite considerably. Whereas I wanted it to be a bit more fluid. You have to make the decision in Kingmaker. Do I want to win as an ally, or do I think I can push it through on my own? Now, if there's a penalty for breaking an alliance, you're much less likely to be able to push it through on your own. So it makes alliances much too stable. So I took that out. I think it's enough.
I mean, without blowing smoke up your posterior, I think that breaking it at the end of the turn is just such a neat way around that.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's go through the quick questions. How does it impact the game? How it affects the experience at the table? I think it's just going to mean that you have to pay more attention to who is winning and who could help you to win. And it adds more. I know it's not a negotiation game, but I think that generally alliances will add scope for negotiation.
Yeah, I think the major key difference between the game with alliances is that it injects more politics into the game. Okay, you can have politics with negotiation, but it makes it more political. It means that you're never really playing a kind of solo style game with a few people who are trying to do the solo game better than you. It's going to have it's got player interaction. That's what it injects into the game. You can't avoid playing. I mean, even if you're playing a game with alliances and you say you don't want to do one, you are having to say to other people, yeah, I don't want an alliance. So there's still going to be some communication about that, which is politics. So it makes the game into a political game.
It gives you something else to leverage. I mean, when I look at bringing up Seize the Power, which is an unpublished game, hopefully it will be released someday, about subjugation of power and discrimination and corruption. There's no alliances as such, but when I look at how we made it possible to do, like, you've got houses in this game. If you have to pay rent at the start of your turn on your house, or at the end, then it means that you can't necessarily give the house anytime you want. But if we just say you have to pay the rent when you receive the house, whether it's from the market or from another player, you have to pay the rent. And that means that maybe because the value of money, it's naturally going to go down, because during the game, there's more cards that give you more money, and there's going to be more jobs available. People will have more education, they will get more money. And so the value of the money goes down, at which point you might really want a house, you might be able to afford it, but someone's already pipped you to it. In which case now, by having the ability for someone to say, yes, I will give you this, and I promise to give you it back. The rule we had was anything that you say you will do on this turn is binding.
Right.
So if I say, give me this house and I will give it back to you, then if you say you'll give it back on that turn, you have to do it.
Yes.
If you say something slightly different that affects a future turn, then, well, that's up in the air, but you might still want to do it, because
that's negotiation, isn't it? That's negotiation.
Yeah, but my
point
point is that by making houses something that people can actually offer to other people to let them get the benefit, that's another avenue of negotiation, another avenue of politics. And as soon as you bring any new rules, as long as these rules are thoughtfully designed, it's another avenue of interaction, of politics, of negotiation.
So I would say, in answer to the second question, how will it affect experience at the table? It does mean that you need to like that player interaction, that discussion, the amorphous stuff of politics comes in here with alliances and negotiation. In fact, alliances are intimately related to negotiation. So you may, I mean, it happens all the time, doesn't it, in this type of game? You may want an alliance, but you have to make it attractive to your opponent. So you are negotiating how to start that alliance. And if you don't like that, if you prefer a game where it's formal mechanisms of gathering resources and formal methods of trading, then you're not really going to like this type of game with a lot of politics, because the player interaction, the informal nature of that player interaction is key. It's how it becomes not just what you say, it's how you say it, how your opponent's interpreting what you're doing. That's key.
Interesting dichotomy that you need these formal rules for it to be technically an alliance, but these formal rules are essentially there to bring about the informal discussion. Whereas, like, I could say to that player who loves alliances, I will ally with you under the old rules on the second turn, as long as you promise to do this on the first round.
Yes.
And I could say that. I could. And
one thing we haven't really talked about, which is a definite impact, is shifting alliances definitely assumes that alliances may be broken. And that is a key part of politics. How trustworthy are you as an ally? If a player has a reputation for breaking alliances, backstabbing is part of it. If you have a reputation for backstabbing, you're a much less reliable potential ally than if you have a reputation for sticking through thick and thin. That can be quite a key thing about games with alliances.
I kind of disagree here. I feel like, yes, there can be a little bit of it, but if you are thinking too much further ahead than just this one fight in Cosmic Encounter, I think that that's not what the game really encourages you to do. And I think that the potential for treachery and backstabbery is much more palpable in a game like Diplomacy or Risk, where, yes, there is no formality. And I think that formality actually takes the potential for backstabbery not out of it, but it reduces it massively.
It does reduce it, yes, but it doesn't take it away. And that, I think, is quite key. I mean, Kingmaker is a classic one where if I'm the stronger partner in the alliance, there may come a time when I think, well, I don't actually need my weak ally. I can just win it on my own. In which case, I can break the alliance, and I can win on my own. That's the That's
And
that
the
lack of
interesting thing
stability.
about these sorts of allies where you can win together or you cannot win together is that it also gets into the whole player motivation of,
Yes.
as a player, do I consider a solo victory equal to a team victory? And the truth is that if I were playing Kingmaker for the first time, I would kind of consider them fairly equal.
Yes, it's one of the things that we did consider. I mean, I did consider that a lot when designing the new version of Kingmaker, and really, it just depends so much on the people in the game that I think providing all those ways in which you can work out as a group how those alliances, or not alliances for that matter, how those are going to work out. All you can do is say, right, here's the mechanisms for alliances, and here's the mechanisms for winning, and basically you have to work that out during play. You could argue that something like Kingmaker, or a game where alliances are quite strong, are entirely methods of the players working out who they are wanting to win, who is going to win. And if there's a really strong faction and the other people really don't like how that player is playing, they can all gang up on that player and make sure that player doesn't win. So the negotiation goes against that individual. And if that individual can then persuade one of those other players to help them,
I think we need to agree that any games which have high interaction, whether that be positive interaction or negative interaction, it's very much about, part of the skill of winning is being mindful of how good a state everyone else is in. Whereas, if I'm playing a Grit Club 2 players, you better believe that I'm going to look at what you want and try to block you.
Yes.
But even as soon as we get to the third player, then the interaction is low enough that I'm going to focus on my own stuff. Sure, I might think about what other people want, but I'm not going to go somewhere that's equal for me if it's better for someone else, but I'm not going to go somewhere that's worse for me if it's better for someone else. Typically.
That's why I do like the kind of Struggle of Empires formal and intrigue, for that matter, formal negotiations about how you ally. It's very interesting because you're taking into account your perception of how well everybody else is doing, and of course how well they might do in the future, and all of that goes into the mix. And that's what's really fascinating about alliances, and I like it linked with negotiation.
Let's talk about the versatility of it. Like what games it would fit. What will it work well with? I mean, when I was thinking about Carcassonne, and like Carcassonne, if you want it to be a negotiation game, it absolutely can be. I think that there's a lot of scope for negotiation in saying, I promise I won't put another meeple in here to take over this thing. Let's carry on working on this together, and let's work on this road. There is the scope for that. And I imagine you could make a formal alliance version of Carcassonne. You could.
I'm not sure how interesting it would be, though, because the scope for working together on things is quite limited, and it kind of
I don't know. Like as soon as you've got the meeples on the same road or the same city, whatever, you're like, hey, let's stay together. And I guess the formality would be you're not allowed to overtake that allied player in anything, but you're allowed to maybe join them more easily. Maybe normally you need to then it would just be like you get the same number of points on everything if you could say
I think where you've got a game like Carcassonne or Settlers of Catan, something like that, where there are formal mechanisms which are fundamentally based on your own personal advancement, and you're either trying to optimize your working with the system, or you're trying to compete much more directly against the other players, like with action selection. If you're picking an action, nobody else can get that action, that kind of thing. Those are very direct methods in which you're working against the other players. I'm thinking I mean, you could squeeze alliances in, I suppose, but it would fit, to me, it would feel a bit weird in that.
It would. I mean, I am interested in weirds. I mean,
well, yes, I understand this.
But yes, I agree that to make it fit well, there probably already needs to be enough scope for direct interaction, for pooling of some sorts of resources that maybe you can share or spend or attack together as one. I mean, there is a formal... Yeah, I'm wondering... Actually, shouldn't Roots be on this list? I just realized that Roots wasn't on the list because...
Can you have alliance victories in Roots? I don't know.
Yes, you can.
Oh, right, okay.
Because with the Vagabond, I don't think you played as the Vagabond.
I don't think I have played as the Vagabond.
That is the fourth faction in the base game. So there's the Irie who grow up and become stronger and stronger, the Marquis, the Cat, who have a strong factory set up, and then if you break them down, and then you've got the Woodland Alliance who have the fists, and then they're going to spring out of nowhere. And then you've got the Vagabond, and the Vagabond is playing this kind of strange, almost solo. It's not as interactive, but then you can give people cards in order for one of these items, which are essentially useless to that person. Yes. So the only person who actually wants these items is the Vagabond. And so the Vagabond is like, hey, let's trade. I'll give you this. And it's a forced trade.
But it's a negotiation, not an alliance.
There's more to that. There's more to that.
Okay.
So if you trade multiple times, then eventually you can be properly allied. And then you can actually say, okay, I'm going to take my score marker off the board and we will win together. But you can only ally with the worst person, interestingly. So you can only ally with the person who's lowest on the score table.
That is interesting. Yeah, okay. That's an interesting implementation of alliance. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously, we can see here that although it feels like it's a one-sentence definition, it feels fairly simplistic. It actually can be implemented in lots and lots of different ways, alliances.
I mean, the key thing is that because it is such a high interaction, and even though it's not negotiation, it does lead to negotiation. It creates more negotiation in the English sense.
And I think that the games it fits well with are those that have a lot of player interaction, and that's because
there needs to be a certain degree of complexity. I don't think you can have a very simple high player interaction game. I'm trying to actually think of the simplest high player interaction game I can think of. I'm struggling
with alliances. It's
not with alliances. I'm just literally what's the
well, I mean, it doesn't. I'm not sure. Does it? No, it has to have quite a high degree of player interaction. Yes. I mean, even campaign, the early one I mentioned, that is direct conflict between players. There is, I mean, there's a high level of player interaction in the sense that you're attacking each other directly. So although you can have alliances, but simply by swapping your alliance card, there is still, even if you don't do that, there's still a lot of player interaction.
There's no need.
You're not just collecting resources and turning them into victory points in that sense. And those are the games where I feel that it's less likely that you have alliances. Personally, I think that it fits well with games which are revolving around alliances.
Can we talk about Risk for a moment?
Risk, yeah.
I think that Risk is like traditional Risk. There's no objectives, just complete world domination.
Yes.
It's possibly the simplest high player interaction game I'm thinking of. And I'm just wondering, could you have some system like Dune, where periodically you just say, okay, we are allied, we cannot attack
each other.
And if we occupy if it was occupy the entire board, we win. then I don't know if those allies would ever be formed.
If you can only have one player winning, if there's no alliance,
no, you need to have. I mean, I'm assuming you can joint win. You can joint win.
Oh,
that's in this hypothetical version,
right? It's a very that would become a very different game, though, wouldn't it? Because you could, for example, one of the dynamics in that type of game might be, oh well, if we can win together, if we're both, if say we're first and second players, what we feel we are, we could just say, oh well, we'll just work together and win, and just crush the other two or the other three, which wouldn't be a very interesting game because it just means that the two strong players could ally and win.
Again, this gets back to, do players believe that a personal victory is greater than a team victory?
It does,
because would the first player try to keep going on their own, and then the second and third player ally?
Exactly. All of those things.
Because that might actually now be an interesting thing.
Yes. I mean, for example, in King, going back to Kingmaker, if I'm the lead, the kind of strongest faction, and I've got a royal peace, and I know one of the other factions hasn't got a royal peace, so in the middle of the game they're effectively quite weak, I might well want to ally with that person, because if I win, I'm winning. Everybody will know if I win, I'm winning on the merits of my faction, and they're just a weak ally. They win as well, but it's not a very big win for them. You see what I mean? There's that kind of approach you can take. Whereas if you're allying with somebody who's also quite strong, there'll be a feeling around the table, well, why are you doing this? It's just too easy for you. And that's going to be a much less stable alliance. Because both of those relatively strong players would be tempted to split and allow somebody else.
And talking about it in this way, it makes me feel like alliances, similar to any auction, well, more so than auctions, I would say, and similar to any trading and negotiation game, it's incredibly player dependent.
Yes, I mean that's a real difficulty in design as well, because like I said with Kingmaker, you don't really want to have a situation where two players just at the start of the game decide, well, we're going to ally and dominate the whole game, and that'll be the end, because that won't necessarily be a good game for the other players. So you have to be careful when you're designing that kind of alliance system.
Now, when we think about who would enjoy it, with a dexterity game, it's really easy to say, oh, well, I don't. You kind of know this. But I feel like the people who would enjoy games with alliances or not enjoy them, it comes down to, do you mind games potentially being ruined by, not ruined, it depends on your sense of ruined. Do you mind games being dictated by the dynamic around the table? If you enjoy that, then you'll probably enjoy alliances.
Yes, I think that's right. I think that's correct. Oh, there was another version which we didn't cover, which I was going to mention, which is Solo Whist. Solo Whist, which has a very small thingy about alliance in it. You can bid prop and cop. If you in Solo Whist, you're basically saying, as a solo player, you're saying I will win this many tricks, depending on what trumps are selected, and you're bidding for that. So there's a level of hierarchy of bids, and you overbid a weaker bid. One of the bids is prop. Now, if you bid prop, you're saying, if somebody allies with me by bidding cop, we undertake to win the majority of tricks. Which is a kind of alliance. So you can, and it's even strategic, because you're winning the whole game by virtue of the number of overall points that you're getting. So you might bid prop in order to give yourself a chance to have an alliance with a weaker player who can cop, and you can both get points to catch up with the leader, for example, or to deny somebody else the chance of doing the same thing. It's a very it's a kind of weak alliance, and it's only in one round, but it's quite an interesting way of doing it. And you wouldn't think that whist lends itself to alliances, but it's
Well,
a
it
bit
just
more like the
lasts as
Cosmic
long
Encounter.
as Cosmic can.
Yes, it's like the Cosmic Encounter one, but it's quite an interesting injection into that kind of whist, which is all basically personal,
like a very opportunistic thing.
Yeah.
And it feels like, that is interesting. And I'm going to say it's good where fundamentally you want people to work together, but you don't want people to backstab too easily. That's fundamentally when it's good.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah, the limited backstabbing is good. Yeah, whereas with negotiation games, especially if it's open negotiations which aren't enforced, that can lead to horrible backstabbing. Yeah.
Okay, what issues might there be having alliances in a game? I mean, I guess if there's no reason for the alliance, if there's you like any mechanism, you want to make sure that it's actually used by the players. But beyond that,
I
guess you talked about actually the notion of not having too strong a penalty. So you want to have the penalty strong enough so that it doesn't become meaningless. You want there has to be some penalty or some you can only end on this time, which interestingly saying you can only end at the end of your turn on a turn-based game is really strong. But then you want it to be not too strong a penalty that it just lasts the entire game.
Yes. The key in terms of the design is you have to take into account, well, either alliances are central, in which case they always have to happen and they just shift around, in which case the game is revolving around alliances, which is fine, like Struggle of Empires. Otherwise, you have to be careful that the game works well without when people aren't allied, and also when they are, and that is quite a challenge to have the game system working well in both those cases. In fact, I like the the more I think about it, I like the ideology one, where you've kind of automatically got alliance, because you will start at I think you will start at peace with each other. Can't remember now. You either start at peace or neutral. So you can't just straight off attack each other militarily. You're not allowed to do that. So it's built in that there will be shifting alliances. And I like that implementation rather than having something forced. Don't force alliances. That's the best thing.
Yeah. And a quick hello to Xate. Thank you for joining us. We are just finishing up talking about alliances. And the final question, have we used it in any games? I mean, you've used it in the developed version of Kingmaker. And maybe Confucius.
Maybe Confucius, I can see. I hadn't thought of that before, but maybe Confucius, that is a form of forced alliance, which is, that's... Yep.
But it feels like a related thing, which is probably in too few games currently to have its own, header.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
But I haven't used it in any games. This was making me think actually, because really high player counts. Once we've played, it does matter on the specific players. I think that 4 or 5 is probably my favorite. For Seize the Power, 6 or more, it gets a bit slow because you have to negotiate with literally everyone. Will let's use this. And if you could just say, okay, we are having a cooperative, like just with us, and we are going to pull all our rules together, and that would be a way to speed the game up, because that would potentially be a way to go to the higher player counts and allow for those and I'm actually wondering whether revolutions are a form of alliance, because within the revolutions you say, who would like to join me on this revolution?
Yes.
And everyone who wants to join raises their fist. And again, this is in flux. The game is not done at all. But what we were based on who is within the revolution or outside the revolution, there might be a difference of what's actually happened.
Yeah, speaking of revolution, what about Junta? Does Junta count as alliance? Do you know Junta? It's the old kind of
Junta, I thought it was called.
Junta, whatever.
It's been so long since I played that.
Because in that game, the government is basically the president and the head of the secret police, who are, well, they're formally allied in a sense, I think, in that it's interesting. I don't know whether it feels like an alliance.
Overlapping desires.
They've formally got overlapping desires, certainly, but
there's not necessarily a limitation, or is there, on what they are able to do to each other?
I can't remember.
But anyway, we have been going for a while. I think there's a lot to ponder, and we could continue. I mean, we could easily come back to this, and there's so many games. I think that what we've learned is that an alliance, it has to be a player's decision, not necessarily your decision. It can be a unilateral decision, and that's also interesting. But it has to be some player's decision, and there has to be some bidding or some and obligations feel like a cousin of this, where there's not even Struggle of Empires, just to clarify, you are able to outbid and repel the unilateral decision. And it's kind of like, how much is it worth to you to not be part of this alliance? Almost.
Yes, you may not be able to outbid, of course. But yes. Yeah.
But it feels so. There is this toing and froing, and even though it can be forced upon you, there's the potential for coming out of it, which I guess does set it aside from the Confucius style obligations. I would say that we've decided that it just gives another opportunity for people to discuss. It makes the game more about the people. It means that you are able to, by formalizing the rules, it means that you are able to trust the people. And whilst it will still be highly player dependent, it is marginally less player dependent than if those formalized rules were not in the game.
Yes.
And I think this is almost like a common thread with, if you look at rules light RPGs versus board games, I feel like there's a continuum of the more rules that you add to things, the less player dependent they become as a, in general, maybe.
Maybe that may be right. The more that type of stuff, the more politicking there is.
Like the more that your agency is clearly defined by the rules, which alliances are basically a formalization of negotiation.
Yes. So you could argue that the more space you have for negotiation, and the more constraints you have around that negotiation, the more it feels like politics, I think.
I mean, I would agree with that, although that seems like a totally separate point to what I was saying. But let's get back to the main thing, start wrapping up. And Alan, would you like to ask the question of the day? Question of the day. Here's a little question before we go on our way.
A question. Okay. Well, I think a very general question is, what is your current favorite book? Now, I often have a kind of book at a fortnight, because I do a lot of reading. A lot of.
This is the one that's right beside me.
Oh yeah. Well, this is the one, I've got that as well. But this is the one that I've been looking at because I've been doing the Kingmaker stuff. Thomas Penn, Brothers York. It's a really very, very readable book about the Yorkists in the Wars of the Roses. So good old Richard York, Edward IV, George of Clarence, and Edmund, who is another brother, and of course Richard III. So if you want an exciting read and a really very readable flip through the Wars of the Roses, this is it. It's a very good book.
So if you're excited by history and you want to learn about War of the Roses,
that's one.
Timmy
so
says,
what's your favourite book at the moment?
Timmy says, I don't know if I have a fave book. I don't read too much, but even if you've only read 5 books in your life, which one of those was your favourite? I often would cite The Little Prince. That's kind of my general, if I actually have to write it down somewhere where it says, oh, your favourite book on some sort of profile, I will put The Little Prince because I feel like it reflects me. I would also say anything by Dave Gorman, although the truth is that I'm going to say that Yes Man by Danny Wallace.
I don't know that.
So Yes Man is a true story about, so I don't know if you've heard of Dave Gorman, the person who searched for 54 different people named Dave Gorman.
Yes, I have.
And then they ended up, the final few were found actually by people even changing their name. But it's a ridiculous story. It's lots of adventure. Danny Wallace is the person who made that bet to Dave Gorman, who said, I bet you can't, there's not that many Dave Gormans, and said, how many is lots? Danny said, oh, well, here's a pack of cards, this many, 54.
Oh, right.
And
I have several actually myself to answer the question. I mean, I very much like Green Eggs and Ham. By Dr. Seuss. It's very hard to beat Green Eggs and Ham. But then again, I may be influenced by reading children's books to my grandchildren. But you know,
I like that one about I had trouble on the way to
Sola Salou.
Yeah, Sola Salou. That's a really nice one.
It is a good one. That yes.
Timmy wants to give a shout out to Crystal Cave. So Crystal Cave is pretty good. Yoda says, does Facebook count? But on a more serious note, I'm currently reading the Witcher series and I'm enjoying it. Robert, I have played Make Me a Planet. Yes, it is such a fun game. I agree. And even though I don't think any interactive game would struggle to capture the themes of the thing, but I think that if you love tiny planets and big things on them, you know, it captures a little bit of the whimsy, if not the internal message of the game, I would say. It's a lovely game. Yeah. Agreed. I wanted to say yes, man. Danny Wallace decides that they're going to say yes to everything for a year.
Oh, okay.
And it's the story of what happens when they say yes to everything, and about the opportunities that come, and stuff that doesn't happen so well. And there is a film based on the book, but the film is not as good, in my opinion, because the book is actually deals with, this is how it's actually happened. And whereas the film, they kind of made it more perfect and say yes to everything, it'll be okay, it'll all go perfectly, which isn't exactly true. But
to inject a slightly different thing, flavor into this, I've actually also been reading the Gospel of Thomas. I'm not a religious person particularly, but the Gospel of Thomas, if you haven't read it, it's really, really interesting. It's a specific different take on early Christianity, and it's a challenging read. It's thinky, very, very thinky, because it's a spiritual type of book, very thinky. So I would recommend that. If you're religious or not religious, it's really, really interesting.
Sounds good. And so at this point, as always, I'm going to ask over to you, what are you up to? You can share button if you want to. I have already said before we started recording, my main priority today, yes, I've got outstanding stuff to post, but the thing I really, really, really need to get done is sort out my passport. That's going to be the thing that I do, if nothing else, I will do that.
Good, that would be helpful.
I am having, I'm not going to lie, bad morning. I might have a bit of a lie down. Maybe cook something simple. Maybe even just put some fish fingers into the oven for a bit. Maybe with some potatoes. But yeah, or fish fingers and peas. Yeah, I could just, yeah. Anyway, that's what I'm going to do. But get my passport sorted. That is my main thing. And I never actually. If there's anything that you want to share, something you're looking forward to, hopes and ambitions, share anything that you want. Feel free to share. I promise that I care. Alan, what are you up to generally?
Right. Two things. One is, well, I've got some excellent preparation to do. I've got things like book the ferry, make sure we've got the exhibitor passes, make sure I've got this. I have to have a carnet to go with my car. So it will say to our wonderful customs officials that what I'm taking in the car is exhibition stuff that I'm going to bring back into the country when I've finished. So that's a way of making sure you don't get stopped at customs and they don't start charging you for things that look like you're going to sell them. That's one thing. And the other thing is I have recently printed out these pages. This is some of the stuff for the Kingmaker punch board. So you know what? I thought I'll print them all out on labels and actually make the version of the Kingmaker punch board with all the new artwork on it.
And I am delighted to say that I have had a hand in influencing the Kingmaker map.
Yeah, I can't show you that bit yet because I haven't got it to hand. But there's a little bit that's bez. A little bit that's bez.
Yes, it would be slightly different if it wasn't for me because I noticed something that. And of course, if you want to check me out, the thing that I would like everyone to check out is my Kickstarter. I am actually going to say, Alan, that I am delighted that I launched this because I have already ordered the first printing. There's 50 copies that I'm probably going to sell out of at Tabletop Scotland, I expect. I don't know. But this was, and originally I wanted to do a Kickstarter and say, how many should I even print? And am I going to print 50? Am I going to print 200? Yeah. I don't expect it to go massive. But I made sure to do the Kickstarter. You can spend like a couple of hours making the Kickstarter page and then submit it to reviews that you get the preview page. And because only 15 people had signed up, I was like, yeah, is it even worth me doing? But then I thought, you know what? Should I do it? I'm not sure. I asked people on Twitter. 3 people said yes. 1 person said no, wait until the end of the month when people get their money. But like, you know, you'll be charged at the end of the month anyway. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And I launched it. And I am delighted that it's not my biggest Kickstarter by any means, but it's been a fairly successful thing. It's allowed me to reach people that I wouldn't have otherwise reached. It's allowed me to have this wonderful conversations with people. And when I asked in my first update, what's the reason why you backed? In my second update, what are some extra bits that you would like? Because frankly, if 15 people had backed it, and it would have funded for £100, I would have just either kept back some copies or done a straight up reprint. But at this point, it's like, well, I've got the first edition. That's going to be me playing it, and we'll play it and see how it goes. And this will be for the second edition. And so I will change some stuff because it's gone well enough, and I will maybe work out some non-real-time rules and stuff, because that seems to be what people are asking for. And it's just a delight to have, and I think this is what I'm going to try and do in future, not stress too much about these, and just put them out there. And even if it turns out to be $6 a year, because they are fairly cheap, it's not like I'm asking a lot of people to back it. And I also want to say I'm delighted by how generous people have been with this. So I started off with 5 copies available for low-income folk, and then so many more people said, yeah, I'm going to chip in £4 so that I can co-sponsor someone else getting a copy. And if not all of them are claimed, that will roll forwards into the next Kickstarter and so forth. So that's a really nice thing that people are, contributing to a pool so that even if someone in the UK, if you like the sound of my games, if you like the sound of taking a minute to select 7 cards and you need to really speedily search for synergies, so you're looking for the cake or the music icons or whatever and searching for text, and then if you like that and you can afford it, then please buy it. If you like that and you can't afford it and you're like, oh well, I can't afford the £8 that it would cost me to pay for the game plus the postage, but I could afford £2 and I would actually play the game. If the money is the thing that's stopping you buying the game, you have the opportunity to buy a copy of the game.
I have just pledged. You'll be glad to hear.
Thank you very much.
So,
but
it looks great.
I am delighted by people, being so generous and being able to offer this to people. To recap and wrap up before we finish up, if you want to, we talked about alliances. We talked about there's so much going on in alliances, more formal than negotiation, more temporary than team-based games. We talked about this voting where this big teams, which is really interesting because it's not just allied with one player, it's allied with a whole bunch of players, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then you've got the alliances with just the one player. You've got Cosmic Encounter, you've got Dune, where things are kind of negotiated, and we've got, interestingly, when do these alliances end? If it's not at a particular time, then you kind of need to have some sort of punishment. But by saying you can only do it at the end of your turn, I think that's my biggest takeaway, that's just such a neat way to allow the other person the first opportunity to backstab you.
I think there's a good alliance there. You can ally with Superman. That sounds good.
We also had a nice discussion about books and The Little Prince and Witcher series and Crystal Cave and all sorts of things. And you've got to do Essen preparation. I've got to do Tabletop Scotland preparation, which is this weekend. But if you want to check me out, I am StuffByBez in all the places, stuffbybez.com/streams. If you want to find out what I'm up to in future. Tomorrow I am hopefully meeting someone. I'm having a first chat with someone new. Wednesday will be just general questions. I'll ask my Kickstarter backers if they have any questions that I might be better placed to answer in a more chatty method, which this would be good for. And Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday will be on the road. Kind of. Thursday I'll be leaving. Friday I'll be in Scotland. Saturday, Sunday will be a quick 5-minute thing for, hey, here's Tabletop Scotland. And you get to see 5 minutes of it. Because that's apparently what I do these days. I don't know what I'll do when I get to Essen. Because, do you still get free internet connection? Because you used to many years ago when we last went before Brexit.
I don't know. I presume so. I'm hoping so.
It would be good.
Have fun in Scotland.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that'd be good. I didn't I couldn't make Tabletop Scotland because we already had a prior engagement that weekend. But
that is totally reasonable. But if you would like to check out Alan, where do you like to be found?
I am Alan at surprisetechgames.co.uk. I am Bentham Fish on Twitter. I have a blog on the Surprise Tech Games website, and I'm Alan Paull on Boardgamegeek. Any of those would be fine.
And thank you very much, Alan, for joining this stream.
Pleasure.
Thank you, everyone who's been contributing a bit of chat, answering the question of the day, and being a lovely audience. Lots of love. And you know what?
Thanks, everybody.
let's do a quick raid on Twitch. If you are on Twitch, let us go to
Who are you going to find?
Piano Man Dom is playing music. Erin Shalev is some very energetic people, or there is French people. Let's go to Piano Man Dom. And so we are going to raid. Please copy the raid thing if you are watching live on Twitch. And on Twitch, let's see if I can raid Piano Man Dom. Let's see if that works. For now, lots of love and bye, bye,
Bye bye.
bye, bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.